Happy Sunday, everybody. Tim from Alpha Wolf Trading coming at you with this week's stocks to watch for trading and investing. All right, so let's take a look at what we've got coming up for next week. Economic data, we've got nothing scheduled for Monday. We've got NFIB Small Business Index, Producer Price Index, Consumer Price Index, Core CPI. We've got the federal budget, weekly jobless claims, retail sales ex autos, industrial production capacity utilization, consumer sentiment, and business inventory. So we do have some economic data that could move the markets. I think the big focus next week is going to be Mexico and the tariffs. We are getting a couple of headlines out this weekend. I really don't think that is going to turn it into tariffs being enacted. I think they'll get something figured out, but the market is worried about it. We'll have to see how it plays out. If they go through, I think that would be that definitely could put some more pressure on equities, but we'll see how it plays out. In terms of earnings for next week, there are a few names that I think will be worth keeping an eye on. Of course, CRM is one that I think is important to keep an eye on. I don't intend to play it, but it is one that I think you want to keep an eye on. Zoom, of course, which has had the crazy run since its IPO, that will be interesting. Beyond Meat, which is beyond reality with its run, is one that I think you keep an eye on. Potentially could be interesting, but those are not stocks that I am looking to trade. I'm typically long biased, and Zoom and Beyond I think have gone a bit parabolic. If anything, those could wind up being short opportunities, but that is not really my forte. So that's where I'm at for next week in terms of earnings. We'll get to the list of stocks that I'm keeping an eye on for potential trades in a minute. Let's take a look at the markets first. So we do have a couple of things going on next week that I think could be impactful to a couple of sectors. And one of those is the biotech space. You got the Super Bowl. They call it the Super Bowl of biotech conferences, ASCO, next week, or actually it's happening now. Getting all kinds of news out this weekend with biotech stocks. And what I think is kind of interesting about biotechs potentially being an area where we see some strength. It is at an area of potential support here, right around the $100 mark. It was the first sector really to kind of break down ahead of all the other sectors. So maybe if we get some real positive news, we get some big movers within that space, maybe that's the sector that helps give us the rally, right? Leads us back out. So that's something to keep in mind as that, news from that conference hits the wires next week. I'm sure we're going to have stocks that are gapping up on Monday, and potentially, you have some stocks that are gapping down, right? If they have some negative news. But big conference happening in that space, and it could be a catalyst for the sector. So worth keeping a close eye on. IBB, the IWM broke down concerning, but also at an area of potential price support. So, below the 200-day, below the 50-day, death cross. We've got a lot of stuff going on there. Not real positive, but that's the case we have with quite a few sectors, actually, right? We've broken below the 200-day, the 50-day. We've got a couple that are looking at death crosses. Not a lot of good stuff going on out there for the overall markets. Now, we also next week have a LD Micro conference going on. So there could be some small caps, some micro caps that actually get some action if they present well at the LD Micro Conference that's coming up next week. So that's another sector to keep a close eye on. There could be some movers within the small cap space. IYT broken down below an area of price support. Actually kind of in an area here where we might find some support right there, but we actually broke down below this area 180, and that is looking pretty weak there in the transportation space. So that's a bit concerning. LABD, so if the biotechs continue to crater, LABD would actually move higher. It's a triple levered. That's one to keep an eye on. If biotechs, like I said, IBB starts to crater, that could be a trading opportunity. If we get a bounce and you don't want to play a specific biotech, you could look to play the LABU to the long side without having risk in a specific biotech stock. If the bios start to bounce, IBB, LABU could be an interesting trading vehicle. It's not something that I would recommend holding overnight. Maybe if you want to hold some lottos after you bank on a trade throughout the day, that's fine. Just make sure it's size appropriate, because these things can be pretty volatile. The triple levered can be pretty volatile. QQQs, we're pulling back. We're testing the 200-day. We actually closed a little bit below the 200-day. That is concerning, and we could see more continued weakness. But I will say to you that we are approaching oversold conditions, pretty extreme oversold conditions. We'll look at the T2106, T2108, T2107 in a minute, but they're getting to interesting levels, so keep that in mind. So maybe we get a couple more days, 2-3 more days, big flush, some kind of a capitulation day, and then maybe we get a reversal for a little snapback bounce. We'll have to see how it plays out. SMH below the 200-day, at an area of potential price support, trying to hold, within that $100 holla area. There is potential price support here. We break below that, there's a real possibility, if you're looking at some of these charts, that we're heading back down towards a double bottom test, those December lows, right? If we break below this area of price support, the next area for support could be somewhere around the $90 area in the SMH. S&P 500, we closed below the 200-day, a little bit ominous. We'll have to see what happens there. We're at an area of potential price support. If we get below 272, 270, that becomes, I think, problematic. And then on the flip side of that, if we do see continued weakness, TVIX volatility, expect a rise in volatility, and which we are kind of trying to break over this little trend line here. And then TZA, IWM, with that breaking below the 200-day and breaking below area price support, we're starting to see a bit of a breakout in TZA. If that continues in the IWM, look for more upside in TZA, potential short-term trading opportunity there. Aerospace and defense has been a sector that has actually been holding up pretty darn well. Actually, I'd like to see this space pull back a bit. I'd like to see a couple of names pull back to areas that I think are pretty compelling. So, but it has been holding out as one of the sectors that has been holding up extremely well, aerospace and defense. XHB, home builders, pulling back a little bit. Some of the names within that space are really starting to get to interesting areas. If you're more of a long-term hold or swing type player, they're getting to very interesting areas in some individual names. They're oversold and could be nearing some support areas for potential bounce. But like I said, those are more swing or long-term hold plays. XLB building materials pulling back. I mean, all of these sectors are looking pretty weak, right? We're seeing a lot of weakness out there, which just means we need to be cautious. But at some point, I do think it creates some nice potential buying opportunities. XLE Energy, look at this energy, man. Really disappointing action there. Even if oil were to come back, I think energy space is still an area you need to be cautious. It just does not seem, with all the positive stuff, that's positive things that we had happening, you know, Venezuela and Iran, and we got all these things going on, and oil was, you know, hitting new highs, and energy could not get a lift. I mean, even with the big merger acquisition, just couldn't get a lift. So I think the sector is still one that you probably look to avoid. Maybe when we come back down here into this area, get a double bottom test, maybe that would be an opportunity for a little snapback bounce play. XLF financials below the 200-day, below this trend line, coming up to an area of potential support right around 25 bucks or so. Industrials pulling back, testing the area of price support, close below the 200-day, weakness there. XLP, kind of interesting. Broke down a little bit last week, you know, considered area of potential safety, but the valuations within that space were getting pretty lofty, so not a big shock to see a pullback there. I think the next area to maybe keep an eye on would be somewhere around that 200-day moving average, right around 55, 54.50 or so, and see if that holds as support. Healthcare has actually been trying to hold on to the trend line here, but you've got a declining 200-day, or no, I'm sorry, declining 50-day. Healthcare space, I think, on a valuation perspective for long-term hold swings could be interesting, but still seeing a bit of weakness there. Consumer discretionary, testing the 200-day as potential support after testing this trend line up here. At an area of potential price support, we break below that 200-day, probably see a bit of pressure in the consumer discretionary space. And let's see, XOP, oil and exploration, same thing as XLE, a lot of weakness there. And then retail damn near ready to go test those lows that we made in December. So that one's kind of leading the race down to a double bottom test, right? So definitely not one of my favorite sectors. But overall, things are looking a little sketchy out there. A lot of weakness, right? So, but the good news is, like I said earlier, I think we could be getting close to an opportunity for a bit of a snapback bounce rally type situation. We have the McClellan oscillator, which is, you know, at negative 148. That's you're starting to see some fear in the marketplace, but things don't get really interesting till we break maybe down into the negative 250, negative 190 area. Somewhere in that area, things start to, you know, people maybe are getting a little overdone with the fear, and we could be due for some kind of a nice little bounce. So we're really getting close to those areas. T2107, the amount of stocks over the 200-day. So, you know, we're still kind of fiddle in the middle. You know, below 20 is where things start to get interesting. And we are getting that actually in the T2108, right? We're almost getting ready to crack into below 20. And when we start getting below 20 into single digits, that could be an indication that we're ready for some type of a nice bounce or snapback rally. So keep that in mind. All right, so with that in mind, let's take a look at the stocks I have on my radar to watch this week for some potential trades off their earnings. So let me pull up real quick here. All right, so apps. Full disclosure, I have a lotto play left in this name. I bought it way down here, and I have a lotto play, but the thing has actually been holding up really, really well. Testing the 50-day as potential support. Now, they have earnings Monday after the close, and I plan to listen to their earnings call. Depending on what kind of price action we get after the call, if this thing were to pull, if they have good earnings and they give a decent guide and this thing happens to pull back to 250, 230, 240 to 250 area, I would look to add back to my position. And if it breaks out, I may look, over 4 with conviction. I may look to take it for a day trader scalp. So could be looking to add to my swing. Actually, it's probably more of a long-term hold play. I shouldn't say swing. If I get a pullback into the 250, 235 area, 240, provided that the earnings and the guidance look good, I could look to add back to that position. Potential good area of price support there along with the 200-day. ITI, so this was actually on my list to watch last week for the pro members because of the fact that got this potential flat top breakout on the daily time frame. We got a nice little flag pattern consolidating. I thought maybe this might get a run into earnings. Earnings are this week. Monday after the close. It's got a great looking setup. You got the 50-day crossing above the 200-day. It trades pretty thin, 92,000 shares on Friday, 22.5 million shares in the float, fairly small float. If these guys have a nice earnings report and take out this flat top, basically what are we looking for? Take out 560 with some conviction. This thing could get some action, right? Maybe get a nice move in ITI. Communication equipment, I kind of like the space. This has had a pretty big run. I will say this. It's had a pretty big run into these earnings. So even with good earnings, maybe you get a pullback into the 460, 450 area. Maybe that acts as support for a bounce. So depending on what the earnings say, what they say in the earnings call and the guidance they give, this one could be an interesting potential swing play or longer term hold play on a pullback to say the 50 or the 200-day moving average. Potential price support, somewhere between 4 and 450. And if it breaks out over 550 with conviction, could be a nice short-term trading opportunity there. So ITI, I like the setup. Worth keeping an eye on that one. For earnings, Domo, application software has been a very hot space. This one had a big pop, looks like off their last earnings call. Been drifting down, drifting lower since that call, and approaching a gap fill and potentially this trend line as support. So if they report a good number on, let's see, Domo reports on Thursday after the close, maybe you get a nice gap up and go. Maybe you go and retest those highs around $46 or so. Now we could just drift, if the market continues to be weak, we could be drifting back down to this $30 mark ahead of those earnings. And that could be an interesting spot, maybe just to dip the toe into earnings, right? I mean, I wouldn't go in with a bunch of size heading into earnings, but if you wanted to take a little lotto play, could be an interesting spot if it gets down to the $30 mark heading into earnings, for just a little lotto play. SMAR also going to report earnings. Now these guys report on it's here. It's here somewhere. I just got to find it. Oh, Wednesday after the close. It's been stair-stepping higher, consolidating above the 50-day moving average. Another one that's in the software application space, right? So that sector has actually been pretty hot. It's got an interesting look. It might be one that you look to play after earnings if it's a strong earnings and guide. If they have good earnings and, because of the overall market, maybe it was priced for perfection, and if the market is weak, maybe this thing pulls back and tests the 200-day or $32 area, $33 area. That could be an area for potential support for a bounce. I think it's at least worth keeping on the radar. CLDR, ugly chart. These guys report Wednesday after the close. It's actually testing all-time lows. So I'm just looking for a potential snapback play if by chance these guys happen to report a good earnings number. But the trend clearly appears to be down in this thing. So I would be really careful. I probably would wait until after earnings to look to even play it. If they disappoint, this thing is going to be testing more new all-time lows. So caution there. All right, let's take a look at Box. Box is in a very interesting spot, kind of trading in this box. Anyway, we're at a potential area of price support, right? This 1830 seems to be acting as support. Let's call it 1850, 1830. Seems to be acting as support. If it breaks below that 1830, I think that's going to be problematic, and maybe you get a double bottom test down in this 1569 area, and that could be an interesting spot maybe to take it for a bounce. If they report good earnings, though, and they report Monday after the close, maybe we go back up and try to reclaim this 200-day moving average, try to take out the $20 holla. Worth having on the radar, but I probably wouldn't. I certainly would not take it into earnings. OESX announced a nice contract. What was it, last week, and that's what this gap up was for. Gapped up, and it's been consolidating right around the $2 mark. It was a nice size contract. These guys report Tuesday before the open, so I don't think that their earnings are going to be all that stellar this quarter, and that could pull the stock back. I think if this thing gets down to the 165 to 135 area and find support there, could be an interesting spot to take it for a bounce, depending on what they have to say in their earnings call. This thing's only got 21 million shares in the float. Traded 134,000 shares on Friday. Trades pretty thin, but it's got an interesting look. The 50-day is sloping nicely. The 200-day is sloping nicely. And if this thing can take out 225 with some conviction, I think the next area of potential resistance is somewhere between 260 and maybe the $3 holla. It's worth keeping an eye on this one for potential trading opportunity with volume if they give good guidance. OESX. SCWX is another one reporting Skyworks. They are not Skyworks, but SecureWorks. Now, this one is at an area of potential support right around $14 here. These guys report Wednesday before the open. Software application space. Now, I will say this. We're looking at potentially, the makings of the death cross here, so that's a little bit concerning. We aren't there yet, right? If they report bad earnings, we did break this longer term trend line, right? But and we are testing an area of price support. It looks oversold to me, so maybe, with a good earnings report, this could get a nice little snapback bounce. Let's see, I'm not sure what we have for a float here on SCWX, but I think this one is worth keeping on your radar because of the fact that it is at an area of potential price support, and maybe we get some kind of a bounce off of a good earnings report. I mean, I would have to assume that this was an earnings report right here that moved the stock, and it's been drifting lower since. Let's see what the earnings look like this quarter, but this one could be also in play, so worth having on the radar. And that is it. That's my list of stocks to watch from the earnings standpoint. I have a big list of stocks for the pro members coming out in just a little bit. I'll get that out to you shortly. Biotech space is definitely going to be on the radar, and I have quite a few names within that space. So that's it. If you like the video, please do me a favor and hit the like and share the video if you could. That would be much appreciated. And that's it. It could be an interesting week. Let's see what happens. I think we are nearing the potential for a bounce, but it is still a time to remain cautious. Make sure you have a plan for each and every trade. Know your risk reward. Don't chase. And good luck trading next week.